Record this computer. Hey, welcome everybody to the 1.9 Kubernetes release retrospective. This is literally our last call of the year, as Swarna has pointed out. So this has been quite an amazing year. This is our fourth release this year. We've hit within 2 days, I believe, every release target milestone we've set for the year, which is beyond remarkable. I don't know that any other project with as massive a release cadence and being community supported has done as good a job at that. So we need to all pat ourselves on the back for doing what is widely considered impossible by many standards. So again, greatest community ever. I'll just leave it right there. Before we get into the release retrospective itself, I wanted to take a moment and just reflect on why we do the release retrospective and sort of the rules of engagement. Really what we're trying to do is ferret out what are the ways in which we can make our release process better, more inclusive, hopefully more predictable, and easier for the community to interact with and consume. Also, how do we increase our visibility and transparency to the community that uses the software, because this is becoming mission critical for so many things in the world. And we have this incredible covenant of trust that we need to maintain, and the release process is absolutely right in the middle of that. And so that's definitely a key tenet, is that we want to preserve that. So as we're going through this, remember to be respectful and solution-oriented in your communication. We want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and respected. If you have something that's a concern or something you're frustrated with during the process, make sure that you focus on the process, the tools, the technology, whatever that was, and less on the people, because really those are the things as a community that we can change, how we operate in the world. And yeah, and people problems are usually best served on a one-on-one basis and within the constructs of the code of conduct. So if you add an item to the list, please put your name by it so that you can speak to it. If you have something that you don't want to call out publicly, just send me a message behind the scenes, and I will definitely raise it as a concern anonymously for you. And if you, at any point during this meeting, feel like there's something happening that you're not okay with, please also message me privately, and I'll take care of it. So without any further ado, any questions before we go on about sort of the retro rules? Okay, great. So in 1.8, we had a list of things that we had talked about doing. I was not deeply involved in the release this time as much as I was in 1.8, so I didn't actually go through and analyze the things that were follow-ups from 1.8. But I would ask people in the retro to just take a quick look at this list in the retro doc. And if you don't have the doc, I'm going to go ahead and paste a link to it here in the chat so you have it. And there you go. So just take a look over what we said we were going to do from 1.8 and see if this materialized in 1.9. And if these things didn't materialize, was there a reason for it? And or is this something that we just need to try and work harder on for 1.10 release? Okay, so if you scroll down the document to what went well in 1.9, you'll see a list of things there, and we're going to go ahead and run through those. So let me verify. Aaron is on the call. I'm not sure he could make it. He has a few of these, so I'll probably have to speak for Aaron in this. But okay, so what went well? This is our chance to call out things that went well, people that you want to recognize as having done an excellent job during the release process. Things that you felt we should continue doing, because that's a big thing too. Like, it's not all about changing everything up. Sometimes we did the right thing and we should continue doing the right thing. First one I'll claim was that I think Anthony did an absolutely fantastic job during this release. And I think in some ways the Q4 release of Kubernetes is the absolute most difficult, because Oh, let's see. We've got holidays. We've got a shortened dev schedule. We've got KubeCon. I mean, it was truly a cat herding extravaganza, and I think Anthony did a just stellar job on this release, and I appreciate it tremendously. I know it was a lot of work, Anthony, so I know that I'm not the only one who's very thankful for that in the community. So moving down the list, Aaron Krickenberger had, I like the use of SIG release issues that I could link to for specific builds throughout the release process. This is a question for the community too. Did you know that there is a project board on SIG release? And if so, did you ever look at it? I'm probably not sure anybody did. But if you did, maybe let me know in the chat, because I'm curious if the project board is useful or not. Also, Aaron said that he liked the 1.9 team was meeting weekly. I also think that was great. Having regular meetings was helpful to keep everybody in alignment. Every job is now owned by a SIG, and I followed a process to consistently ping job or test owners. Josh, you're the next up.
Okay. So one is that I was really impressed with how responsive people were to being reminded about bug reports even during KubeCon, and that stuff did almost everything got closed in a timely fashion, even though I knew people were in airplanes and everything else. And the other thing is the additional automation, like the automation around the PRs that got added, was very helpful. And we're now at the state where the only thing that we can't do via commands to the bots is milestone assignment. So it makes it easier for everybody to actually control the status of issues without needing to monkey around with GitHub permissions. So.
Cool. And let's see. So you had the two. Did you hit both of those fully, or? Josh?
Yeah, that was both of them.
Okay. Okay, I just want to make sure you said what you needed to. Jennifer, you're up next.
Okay, I have more to say, I should say, about what we didn't do for 1.9 that we said we would do at the end of 1.8. But for all that, I thought that given especially all of the structural constraints around this release, that the release notes really went pretty darn well. I think this having two writers, one sort of lead and one shadowing, is awesome. It takes so much of the individual burden off. And I don't think Nick is on the call, so I just want to call out, he was amazing. He was really fantastic. He thought I did all the heavy lifting. I thought he did all the heavy lifting. It's still not, I think, the process we want to land on, but I think that having the Google Doc worked pretty well for people. And again, I want to call out thanks to everybody who worked on the release notes during KubeCon, because people did step up to the plate and do that. And I was pinging individuals during the conference. I knew that they were busy, and they were all super responsive. So it would be nice if we could get to the point where we're not scrambling at the last minute, but people really did help scramble.
Yes, I do believe that is something I will add to that too, is that seeing this release over release, I do believe it's trending toward better. So that's really a good thing, because I think it's one of the hardest things without a doubt. So, okay. Oh, sorry, Jen.
Nope, that's it.
Okay, Ihor, you're up next.
Yeah, just like to mention how we were good with the features with this release and the features timeline, comparing to the previous releases where we had a set of extra features that were applied and proposed after the formal features deadline. With this release, almost every single feature that was proposed and being implemented in 1.9 was proposed beforehand. That make the big benefit for multiple eras of Kubernetes 1.9, and especially for the marketing era. That's yet another big note for me. So we were really good with the marketing activities in this release. There've been a huge media and marketing coverage beforehand. Especially during KubeCon, it was the largest industry event of the year, and almost every single person was aware of Kubernetes 1.9 and what's happening with 1.9. Even despite the fact that Kubernetes 1.9 wasn't released at that moment. So I would mention how marketing teams, especially Natasha, did a great job getting that.
Yeah, and so tag on that too. The alignment between CNCF and the release process now is super great. It's starting to get better and better every time. Anybody else want to add anything? Shout outs for 1.9. What was something you saw that you thought went well or anything like that? Anybody want to recognize? Okie dokie. Moving on to the next thing. The next thing is what could have gone better. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Anthony for the first part. And then we'll go from him to, I don't know if Lucas is on the call or not. Let me take a look. I don't see him. So I'll do Lucas's, but go ahead and fire off, Anthony.
All right, can you hear me? Good.
Yes, we got you.
Yes.
All right, so these are a few things that I added during the release process since we had this doc prepared already, which was great. One of the things that came up first was at the point where we're asking people to open the placeholder docs, that was confusing for some of the devs. They were thinking like, I don't know, it was kind of hard to get them to understand we don't necessarily need you to have the docs written at that point. And there was some resistance with like, oh, why do I need to do this? And I was trying to explain like, well, this is part of the process that the docs team wants to use. So it works for them. Let's just give them the signal they need. There's some pushback there. So in order to improve this in the future, I think we can revisit, what the process is, why do they need this, but also if it works for them, we should document better in advance and say, explain to the devs, this is why we need it, and so they expect it.
Okay.
Unless there are any comments on that, I'll go to the next one. And the next one was code freeze was scheduled on the last day before a U.S. holiday. Many reviewers and approvers were out that day, placing increased burden on the few who remained. A good example of this was Tim Hawken, who was like the only top-level reviewer who was not out of town on that day, the last day before freeze, and so pretty much everything fell on him if it wasn't covered by the smaller owners files. This one was kind of a conundrum because it seemed equally bad to push it earlier as it did to push it later. So it's something that we'll have to think about for the next Q4 release. As Jay said, we have a lot less time in Q4 than all the other quarters, and we need to figure out some way to establish the scope of the release in Q4 in order to prevent having to put these deadlines so close to these kind of holidays.
Cool. Okay. Any comments about that? I mean, obviously, this sort of gets into the general aspects of the Q4. And actually, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna move up my item because we're sort of already talking about this, which is the Q4. Hang on. Q4 is really, really hard to schedule around. And something I would love to see us dialogue on is, should we even be doing this? Does this even make sense to do a full release cadence in Q4, knowing that we're going to run into this every single time? Don't need to necessarily answer that right now, but maybe we change our expectations or do something differently. Who knows?
When other thought for how we could is the pool of approvers too small? Can we make it so there are more people than just Tim Hawken who are available at this time?
I think that will help throughout the cycle, but it wouldn't have solved the problem of having a deadline on the day before holiday, because the day before holiday often is already the holiday for many people because they take vacation in addition to the holiday.
I largely agree that having a release scheduled near or on Thanksgiving or KubeCon or most of the holidays in general was a bad idea. I raised my objections to this when we were scheduling the release in the first place, and now we all have the experience and data to show how well this works.
Yes. Okay. So Lucas had said a release candidate should have been released. And there is a feature that he referred to which removed the release candidate from the schedule. Anthony, do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I think the PR he's referring to is I edited the schedule after I became release lead. The schedule was put up before I was a release lead. And one of the things that I changed was I think I converted an RC into a beta because something about the timing, it wouldn't have actually given us anything better than, like, we wouldn't have been ready for an RC at that point. And we also, I think, had 0 betas or something weird like that in the original schedule. So basically, it was just renaming the RC to a beta in order to more accurately indicate the amount of confidence we were going to have in that release at the time. And so by the time I did that, there was just no room left in the schedule to have another RC. And that's sort of a Q4 unique issue, because if we had one more week, we could have easily had an RC.
I have one question regarding that. So initially we have, why we have implemented the idea of having RCs. One of the main reasons was to push these RCs to the potential Kubernetes vendors and other people or companies who would like to consume it before. I'm not sure that we did it with the latest beta. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think, yeah, that was the idea of the RC. I don't know if Chase can talk about 1.8. In my experience with 1.6 and 1.7, we didn't end up actually doing anything with the RCs other than publishing it.
Yeah, we had, there was tragically little attention paid to those. And it's not really out there long enough to get solid feedback anyway. I mean, the KubeADM folks and whatnot are obviously using it. There's a few here and there, but the release candidate, just generally speaking, is a really forward-looking thing. As the project gets more and more distributed, the ecosystem becomes less dependent on Kubernetes and more on what things are basically consuming it. Those are going to be super important, and we keep talking about it, but it's so far we're just not getting the kind of wide adoption you get in other open source communities around release candidates, and I'm not sure why that is.
So do we need RCs in the next after 1.10 in 1.10 and later releases in 2018? Do we need the RCs at all?
I'm gonna
like the final beta is enough.
I'm gonna push for RCs.
I'd actually suggest the reason why we're not. I was going to say, it's just the reason we're not seeing adoption of RCs is a combination of us having a short release cycle compared to some projects there's 3 months, and the RCs honestly not being out very long before we get the final release. I mean, the last couple of release cycles, the RCs have been out for a matter of days before we do the final release. So, when would anyone adopt them?
So quick question. Do we have adoption of any of the tagged things before an RC? Because I'm looking now, and so we're starting to look at tools running on top of Kubernetes 1.9, and we're trying to find out where can we get an environment spun up to start testing tools on. And it seems there isn't high adoption of 1.9 even several days after it's been out. And I'm wondering, is that a Q4 thing, or is it because it's hard to upgrade and then deploy that environment, which may make it difficult for people to look at it? I'm curious if there's something else going on there.
Can I replace the word RC with alpha or beta and suggest that it's probably the exact same problem with all of our binary builds?
I think that's a reasonable substitution. I think one problem is that I guess personally, I have not witnessed, well, I guess to your point, Matt, certainly, I guess several vendors that I have seen have struggled to either find the will to consume and make environments available for 1.9, either internally or externally for those who provide hosted solutions. I don't personally know how to improve that. I do think that prevents some adoption, at least for tools built on top of Kubernetes, that there's not an easily consumable hosted option for getting a 1.9 or X version environment.
Yeah, and I'll say for our releases itself, well, 1.8 took a while before it started getting out there as well. And so I'm wondering if we'd like to see adoption of our alphas and our RRCs and maybe get a release out there sooner. Is there a way we can make it easier for people to spin up an environment or to get going? Is there something we can do to lower that barrier? Because it seems hard right now, and that might be making it more difficult, especially with short cycles where an RC is only around for a little while.
It's sort of a chicken and egg problem. I think we as an open source project can't make that happen because that's more on the providers. But in order for the providers to start thinking about that, we as a project, as an open source project, have to get pretty good at reliably producing RCs with enough time before the final release that it makes sense for them to invest in giving early access.
Insert my usual parenthetical rant about us cutting alpha and beta releases with our tests failing. So the results that we display show that our alphas and betas aren't stable or passing our own tests. So if I were a downstream provider, why would I trust that this release is any good? Anecdotally, what I heard on the KubeCon floors were that we've got an Apple-like reputation where you never, ever trust a .0 release. Always just wait until a .1. Let all the suckers who adopt the .0 be the guinea pigs. And this is what we want the release candidate to be. So how can we move this backwards? How can we encourage people to test earlier? My suggestion would be produce something that's viable and build trust earlier. And so to me, that always comes back to make our pass.
Yeah, well, but so then we're talking about a release candidate that's going to be out for like a couple of weeks before the final release, if we're serious about this.
Yeah, I'm effectively approaching it from the perspective of there should be zero difference in the mechanisms that we use to vet and release alpha, beta, RC, and actual builds of Kubernetes. They should all be the same.
And I'd just like to throw in here, Minikube hasn't even released with 1.9 support yet.
Yeah,
and so it's hard because we don't even have our own builds where you're going to go take it and do something with, actually doing something with it.
I don't think it's accidental that this comment, I think, started with Lucas. And I assume he had his KubeADM hat on with that commentary, with that thread of commentary as well. So he's not here, but I would suspect he would be nodding his head as well.
Just getting all the tools that we have that consume Kubernetes, if they have enough time to test their own stuff, KubeADM, Minikube, and friends, that itself would be a really big deal, I think. And that's just a matter of time. We don't give enough time.
Yeah. So this is personally why I try and give precedence to when I hear complaints like this come from KubeADM, because they are an example of a downstream consumer of our binary artifacts that is still kind of close to the fold. So they're very communicative. For all we know, there might be a lot of other people out there who have the same problems that KubeADM does, but they're not willing to come up and participate in this process. And so I'd like to, better understand what we can do to make life easier for KubeADM and see if we can then build that community of people who are actually consuming said binary artifacts. But again, I feel like it's up to us to establish that level of trust and build that relationship.
I have a related comment to make that kind of stretches across a few of these things, and I think it's the same issue as this, so I'll use the opportunity to jump in and say the one thing here, which is
Okay.
that I think the symptom here is that as a community, we're setting up these bars, thresholds, things that need to be done, but then we're not actually sticking to them when it comes to release time. So there's some comments in the retrospective about docs not being done. We're talking about cutting release candidates when tests aren't actually done. I think there was a lot of discussion early on about 1.9 being a stability release. I thought Aaron's comments at the Dev Summit were particularly apropos on this point, which is we talk about stability releases, but for some reason we never quite seem to get there. I think just sticking to our own principles as we go through the release here is it's a really hard thing to do, but it's getting to be increasingly important. I'm glad to see there's at least one member of the steering committee here. I think this is probably the most critical steering committee issue, really. I'll make that as a pitch.
Everybody says that about their steering committee issues, for what it's worth.
But you can see that this one is affecting quite a few things in the course of the release process.
It goes back to the ownership, right? I mean, we tell that the SIGs have to own their issues, triage their issues, take care of their CI jobs and things like that. And things are not happening there, right? We don't see that happening. I don't know how to fix it, but we don't have a strong core ownership by the SIGs of the things that they are responsible for. And we are seeing the effects of that spill over here.
Could I briefly? This is from a docs perspective, but we've been talking about the docs release notes side of this in SIGDocs for a while. And one of the things that I was thinking about at the end of 1.8, sort of indicated in the retrospective, was that what we wanted to do in SIGDocs was partly take ownership of helping make that happen at the SIG level. We haven't really moved forward very far in 1.9, but what we really want to do in the 1.10 cycle, and Jared, Badi, and I are really kind of driving towards this, is start getting better SIGDocs representation on each SIG, so that those of us who know what a good release note looks like can help both identify where it should go in issues or in PRs, and help folks figure out what writing it better would look like. Nick's also got some good ideas for tagging stuff so that we organize things better. The same thing goes for the docs work. So it's not just a matter of saying, okay, the SIGs need to be responsible for release note content or for docs, but SIGDocs will also help them get there. Now, we can't offer representation to everybody for one release. We're going to have to iterate over this, but we really want to try to do it and hope that it will help on that side of things. Now, that doesn't address a whole ton of these issues, but the general principle might hold. Not sure. Thought I'd put it out there at this point anyway.
Jennifer, are you one of the SIG leads? I'm sorry to ask. I should probably know. But
No. I'm part of SIGDocs.
Right.
And, well, Jared and Zach Corlison are really the leads for that. But I've been pretty involved for a while now. And I brought this up in a SIGDocs meeting a few weeks ago, and Jared, has been wanting to push toward this for a while. I think with both of us driving it, and with me having two releases behind me, it's no promises, right? There's all kinds of implementation issues here. And this is only on the, writing strings side of things. But I think you see the point here. There was some pain around docs for 1.9, and we're pretty good at sort of lessons learned there. I'm also going to be leading the docs effort for 1.10, moving from release notes to docs.
So I think there's two questions there. I think you did a really nice job of describing all of the things that folks in the SIG can do to help move things forward. My real question there, the reason I was asking the SIG ownership question is, does the doc SIG or does any SIG feel sufficiently empowered to say, whatever it is, this feature, like in the docs case, this feature, the docs are not good enough, so it doesn't get into the release. And I feel like we still have not gotten all of the SIGs to the point where they're willing to say, something's not good enough, so it's not going to make it in the release, and the release can go ahead. And whether that's, test cases or docs or passing tests or whatever it happens to be, this seems to me at least to be the root of the thing that Aaron was talking about earlier.
Right. That would be only when we have feature branches for larger features that we are developing. Because right now it's going to be really hard to pull stuff out from the release. If we have to take commits away and revert a bunch of things, then it's going to cause a whole lot of chaos towards the end. But towards the ownership, I had one more thought: is the other foundations, they have concepts like a liaison. It doesn't have to be the SIG lead who is taking part in all the release meetings and the doc meetings. They can delegate one person from the SIG for the release, getting into the release team meetings, and one person into the docs meeting, and that person will be the coordinator for that effort. So that is the concept which probably we can adopt, I think.
I would just point out that SIGs can be a lot smaller, maybe in other projects, and so resourcing can be a problem. At least that's been.
You accidentally muted yourself, Marin.
Oh. No, that was all.
Okay.
No, I agree. I feel like I don't know, those who attend SIG PM can speak better to it than I can, but I thought there was at one point an effort to have a PM representative from each SIG instead of a docs representative from each SIG to make these sort of horizontal or all SIG collaboration efforts easier to do. I'm not sure how well that's paid off or worked in practice.
So this is something that I've been. Oh, sorry. I've been trying to beat this drum for a while that we actually need to turn the model around and empower SIGs through facilitation and other, like the liaison model, because you think about what works well in dev teams. You don't ask a dev team like, hey, pick a scrum master that's one of your developers and have them, they're going to go attend Scrum of Scrums and they're going to attend project meetings. Like, they're a developer, they're not a scrum master. Why would you try and enforce that model? That makes no sense. Like, essentially SIGs are surrogates for very highly qualified dev teams, and we want to empower SIGs to be doing what they do best, which is writing code and tests and doing all that stuff, and letting the subject matter experts on project management and program management and documentation, all that stuff, get into the SIGs to help facilitate and really assist in the things that we're best at, and not try and ask developers to step into other roles that just simply don't make sense. So I think the docs, having a docs person who is the go-to to help the SIGs do the best work, and having a PM representative that goes into the SIGs to help them do their best work, and so on. Like this model, I think, is going to be the winning model, and it's just a matter of how we roll it out. Because I've been trying to do that, and it's
Jace, at this point we are talking about the docs that are for that SIG. We're not talking about docs for the rest of the Kubernetes, right? We're talking about the CI jobs for the SIG. We are talking about the features for that SIG. We're not talking about things. We're not going to ask the node people to write docs for storage or anything like that, right? So I don't know.
No, but what we're trying to do is, again, this is what we're trying to do is provide a coaching as a service, or docs as a service, or program management or project management as a service, and provide that to SIGs. Essentially, we're trying to enable SIGs to focus on their core concerns. So if SIG node is writing on documentation and the person who did the features maybe not super comfortable writing docs, then they could go to SIG docs and say, help, we need some help wordsmithing on this, because we're better coders than we are wordsmithers. And that's just totally fine. There's no shame in that whatsoever. And we just need to
that is exactly what is not happening, right? Because the people in the SIGs are not coming to the point where they're asking for help. So they need somebody on their side who can coordinate. Anyway,
Well,
that's fine.
My approach has been to just show up at a SIG meeting and say, "Hey guys, let's try and do planning for the next in the next quarter," or "Hey, let's do this or that." So I think there's a
Right,
certain amount of we just need to offer.
But then there is only a bunch of us who are doing that across different SIGs, right?
Yeah.
And we are not, basically, that model is not working. How many people will Aaron go knock on to get their CA jobs back up and running, or Josh ping for their PRs and issues and labeling and things like that.
So the issue here is keeping docs up to date, right? And getting docs written that are in good shape.
It's more than that. This is actually a systemic problem across the entire project in about 10 different lenses: architecturally, documentation, program management, project management. What is your planning process? How do you actually detangle dependencies with other SIGs? I mean, this is stuff that big shops, like you talking like the development teams at Ford, or like massive scale agile development. These are patterns that have been solved in other cases. And the way that has traditionally been done is to not try and pull subject matter experts out of teams and make them do things that they're not good at. It's really to try and empower through facilitation. So I think there's a model here that we can leverage and find, but Dim's concern about those people are going to be stretched really thin is something that we need to find a way to address 100%. And so we're going to find a balance, but right now the balance is non-existent largely. So we need to at least move towards something, I think.
The other point is we have to pool of people who are doing this across all the SIGs, and right now we are finding it hard to get people to do that too, right?
So here's one of my problems, right? I've filled a number of these different roles. What I'm not sure is, just through my career, but when I look at it, I say, well, what are these different roles and where are the ones where we need people to fill them? Like, where are the gaps, and then what is the expectation of somebody in those gaps? Because I'm not even sure of where the gaps are, how they affect the SIGs I'm a part of or not, how they relate to. I'm not even sure how that is, because it's not laid out. Like, we talk about it in abstract terms, we're talking about the gaps, but if we don't know what the gaps are, then how do we say, oh, we need people over here, let's go mentor somebody or find people interested in and help them level up, right? So that they can do that. Find somebody who's interested in this stuff and get them engaged in it, help them feel comfortable shifting in and getting the support they need until they're comfortable with it. How can we even do that? That's kind of where I'm at. I hear the problem, but I'm not sure how to describe it well enough to know how to actionably attack it.
Okay, I put a to-do in the action items. We're going to have to move on because we're going to run out of time. To identify role gaps, document, and find liaisons to fill those. And hopefully in that process, we will sort out some of these concerns for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and move on in the sake of time. And I'm feeling in my bones, having done many of these retros before, that we're probably going to have to do a part 2 at some point, which is always less attended. So let's try and make it as far as we can this time. Lucas had a point here about not seeing the value in both a code slush and a code freeze. And some of the labeling requirements, and wondering if we could simply simplify that while still keeping the value. I would love to have Anthony just weigh in on this for a minute, if that's okay, Anthony, if I can put you on the spot, because I know you have feelings about this.
Yeah, so there's 2 things here. One is why we had code slush in addition to code freeze. I want to get to the second one first, which is the automation was kind of overbearing, and that was just a trade-off that we had this automation written already that we were trialing in issues. I asked Mario to turn it on for PRs, and that was just because my judgment was having some automation, even though it was overbearing, was better than zero automation, which was making it a lot harder for the release team in the past to see and have visibility into what's going in, what's not getting in. So to some extent, it was by design that it was annoying to get your stuff in because I wanted to intentionally keep that barrier a little bit higher so that you're only getting it in if you really have understanding of what you're doing and why. And then the first part was why code slash. I sent an email about this with a little FAQ. I think the main point was because of the compressed schedule, I was worried about the fact that code freeze was right before the holiday. And usually what happens is after code freeze, people then have to fight to get things to actually merge and submit queue now is this batch of 100 things that just made the cut. And so what I wanted to do was make that process easier because we knew it would be right up against the holiday. And so I instituted code slash 2 days before, which was saying, you guys that are working on things that are important for the going into the release, you can keep working. Everything else that could wait, we're going to force you to wait 2 days early. And what that did was, I think it was pretty successful that the submit queue was pretty much empty by the time we enacted that, and then only things that would have made freeze were in the queue at that point, and we were able to keep the queue from getting too big. If anyone else has comments on whether that was better or worse than the alternative, I'm happy to discuss.
One of the main problems is that a lot of it was new to people. A lot of people had no idea what code slash meant or what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, that's like a communication problem. Like I can send emails to mailing lists. I don't know what else to do to spread information. Otherwise, we can't just never change anything. So whenever we have changes, we need a way to tell people what's happening.
I'm a bit confused at the idea that this is new to people. I mean, I've been on a few release teams, and we've always had code freeze versus code slash. Has that just not been public, and I've just been living in an internal bubble?
No, I think people maybe were forced to pay attention because we actively delegated babysitting of issues and pull requests by way of having the bot nag them instead of us doing it ourselves.
Oh, so people are just experiencing the pain of the release process rather than it being just constant.
I like to think of it as sharing the love and empowering others, but you got tomato.
And I think in the past, actually, code slash and code freeze were kind of mingled, and sometimes they happened on the same moment.
Really?
Even though one of them is about feature work and one of them is about blocking things that are not feature work. I know for 1.6, we did only have the one deadline that was effectively both slash and freeze happening at the same time.
I mean, my understanding, I'm not sure if there's a doc, Bob. My understanding is that it's just a matter of, you hit code slash, and that means, okay, everything that has been approved can still merge, modulo rebases and the like. And once you have kind of cleared the backlog, then you kind of enter the freeze portion where you're really just fixing problems that are blocking release. You're not doing any work.
Yeah.
The first one is actually what I called freeze.
Oh, I guess that to me differs from what it's been in past releases. It's tended to be that.
Yeah, and the reason I didn't want to change that definition is because the devs are used to the idea that the code freeze date is their last chance to get things approved, and I don't want to change the meaning of that because it's too big of a change to.
So maybe there's an indication that the automation, like the munger, is kind of exposing something that was previously release team internal, and maybe that.
Yeah, it's also kind of exposing that different people have different ideas of what these words mean.
I also wonder if some of the confusion came from the fact that code slash was 2 days and then code freeze was significantly longer. Maybe in an ideal world where we didn't have a long weekend right in the middle of it, they would have been a little more equal in length.
Can I make maybe a suggestion that might help this? I noticed that, well, first of all, coming from a lot of other projects, only a few of the open source projects that I've been on have the notion of code slash and code freeze. So a lot of people coming in may not have noticed or not pay attention and may not be used to it. But then when I go to look at like our documentation, like on the community site, and I search for code slash, I don't find it. Or in Kubernetes, I'm not finding it. So the difference is between what is this and what does it mean? I don't seem to see it documented anymore. So people who aren't familiar with it or familiar with it in our context, or it just hasn't hit them in the face, even if they have been doing Kubernetes, might not know.
Yeah. Yeah, this would be a great thing to put on community.case.io.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
100%.
I think it was previously just an internal thing. I mean, it's documented in the issues process kind of peripherally, but it's not really defined anywhere.
There was a wiki page that I deleted after asking around to see if anybody paid attention to it. Nobody knew what it was or why it was there. So I can restore that wiki page, but it sat there untouched since October of 2016.
No, I'm gonna
that's the same things that are.
I'm gonna take a big fat to do, hopefully before the beginning of the year, to write out a lot about this stuff. Because this is a huge problem and we just keep having it over and over again. And now that the bot is essentially laying down the law on this stuff, we can't let this be tribal knowledge. It has to be discoverable and it has to be right out in front of community. That includes giving a demo at the community meeting, writing to the dev list, doing all the radiation we need to do around this, because this is too critical for our success to not have it be very clear and cut and dried.
So I'm going to pull Vault ahead to one of my things just real quickly. What you're describing sounds like the job of SIG Release, a special interest group dedicated to the release process. And so I would view that as something a SIG should do, not you as a single human being who's actively interested in this, although I really appreciate the effort. And my concern was, although I really liked we as the release team for 1.9 meeting weekly, well ahead of burn down and all that stuff to establish a cadence and gel the team together, it also meant that we didn't meet as SIG Release. I don't know who SIG Release is apart from the people who are tactically involved in getting a release out the door. My impression was the SIG was created so that people such as yourself who are interested in de-tribalizing the release process and actually documenting it once and for all and making it reusable could do that without being down in the weeds and involved in the nitty-gritty of tactically getting the release out the door. But in practice, it seems as though we all just focus on the tactical stuff and there's nobody left behind still focusing on these larger big picture initiatives to improve the process throughout. It concerns me. I don't know where we magically find the staff of people who have the knowledge of the release process who shouldn't be occupied in helping get the release out the door, but instead be focused on this stuff up here. So if that set of people is one and it's Jace right now, that's the state of today. I personally would also like to help improve this. That's why I documented my role as I went. I'm still trying to work on tools to replace my role with a small, tiny shell script, maybe Python script. I don't know. But where is the SIG? The SIG should be doing this, and it just disappeared.
Well, I think the SIG just disappeared because, in terms of staffing for the long-term strategic efforts, it was just me and Phil. Phil had a child, and I'm being grafted into New Big Co. So we did both actually just disappear. But we do need to improve our fault tolerance or our high availability.
So there are two things, right? You're the SIG leads. You're not the SIG. So if the SIG leads are out, we got to find a way to make sure the SIG leads can delegate to other people. But where's the rest of the SIG? Did it all get sucked into the release team?
Yes, we don't have enough people to do both the staff, both the release team and the SIG. Right. It was hard enough just to get, pull people in to volunteer for the release team.
This is the same problem we've always had. I'm not sure how we're improving. I'm trying to document my way out of that problem, and I kind of burnt myself out through about 3 different releases now. So I am explicitly stepping back from the 1.10 release to hopefully improve that situation. But I'm trying to figure out or brainstorm how can the solution to this not be heroes?
Because heroes die.
Yes. And Kubernetes will not.
So, one of the things here, because we have a lot of people who have a lot of domain knowledge, how can we encourage people to help other people get that domain knowledge? Maybe take longer to get something done, but along the way, we build up 2, 3, 4 people who can also do it and like ingrain that into things. I know we like to move fast, and I know a lot of people with a bunch of really smart knowledge, but the more we can share that, the more we can offload the work by bringing other people in.
That was part of the point of having secondaries, is that you could maybe train your secondary along the way. My secondary, unfortunately, had Big Co and other priorities take over, so I kind of lost that opportunity, which is why I tried to document it, so hopefully the next person can pick up from there. But it also creates this big scary impression that if you want to be part of the release, you're going to have to dedicate a significant chunk of time, not just for the release that you were a part of, but in training up for the release. So like, I'm hopeful and optimistic that maybe Chase and I and other people buckling down and really documenting this whole process makes it more consumable and reusable by those who don't have the subject matter expertise. And maybe this truly is just a hump we have to get over. But I feel like I've fooled myself too many times in the past that it's just this hump to get over. And if I be a hero and put in the effort, then things will be better. And it usually hasn't worked out that way in the past. So, like, absolutely your point, how do we make sure that those docs are actually consumable and not just a wall of text that scares people away? How can we make sure that they're friendly and consumable enough?
Just on the need to make the release process sustainable, I think the fact that there's no dedicated personnel, I mean, whether or not, we have people changing from release to release, that's not really what I'm talking about, but it's just all volunteer effort, I'll be honest. I think there needs to be like someone paid by the CNCF or something full-time to, write herd on this. The idea that, just keep burning people out one after the other and rolling over to new people. Eventually, of people who want to do it, or at least people who are capable of doing it.
Yeah, this actually goes into one. Oh,
I would. Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I would really caution against thinking that the CNCF is going to step in and fix these issues. This is something that the project has to somehow figure out.
I guess I'm looking from the perspective of having worked in OpenStack, where they had a full-time release manager. I think he's been with the project the entire time. And to me, that enabled sort of a degree of stability. And also, it wasn't like reinventing the wheel every release cycle. He could coordinate other people's effort, but whether it's the CNCF or something, it just seems like a community that is large, relying on volunteer effort for something so critical. I don't know if that.
Maru, that was about 2 years ago, and that person theory is still around, but he's not. He's just varying. He's employed by the foundation, but the other people are doing the actual work, especially for the last 2 years. There's been at least 2-3 people who have taken over from theory and running the show and automating out of everything. So yeah, that's kind of.
So the one thing I'll say, my experience in lots of projects indicates that people who actually enjoy doing release management are going to always be fewer than the number of release people we need on release teams. And so we need to recruit people to the release team based on other criteria than just you want to do it. One way, and I've already done a little of this, is to actually honestly put the squeeze on some of our new corporate contributors to the Kubernetes project. That if they're going to be a big corporate sponsor to Kubernetes, that includes having one of their staff volunteer for SIG release.
That's a really good idea. I'm writing that down. And we are 2 minutes left in this release retrospective, and we are nigh on 50% through these things. So with the holiday, I'm not really sure when it's going to happen, but we're going to have a part 2. And stay tuned on scheduling for that. I will try and get the word out on when and how we do that. Just to put a bookmark here in this talk, I want to thank everybody for extremely positive conversation on this, and I am so thankful that our community is engaged around these problems, because that's precisely how we're going to evade some of the anti-patterns and rocks that other projects have steered into. So again, thank you for your time. I will schedule the next part 2, and definitely have a fantastic holiday if you celebrate, and definitely appreciate all of you. So take care, everyone. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.